An idea that is totally out of the so-called mainstream. This idea of the mainstream, or extremism, and we get this all the time. My goodness, you people are extremists. Because you think that if the federal government violates the Constitution, that maybe we shouldn't do that thing. And this is extremism. And extremism is another one of these words that's used to shut down discussion. I mean, what, you want to be an extremist? What's wrong with you? No, 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 no. You want to be in the mainstream. The mainstream runs from Hillary Clinton to Mitt Romney. So it's about a 3-inch area, pretty much. Like this, from right here to like here. That's where you want to be. And of course, the point of the video is that in our society, if you want to talk about a real substantive issue, that alone makes you an extremist. Because if you were part of the mainstream, you'd be satisfied with the completely trivial issues they want us to talk about. Should the top marginal, thank you. Well, should the top marginal tax rate be 39.5 or 35%? Which one should it be? Which of two possible ways should the federal government loot us every year? You know, they could loot us by taking this part of our property, or they could loot us by taking another part. Discuss. Well, you know, maybe but those of us who say, you know what, I don't like the way the deck is being stacked in these. I find these questions completely creepy and totally beside the point. How do you answer that question if you don't happen to like being expropriated in the first place? There is no answer for you. You're an extremist. Ooh, ooh, ooh. An extremist just means you disagree with both Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney. That's all it means. But it's an attempt to shut down debate. And the way you respond to that is, first of all, of course, by refusing to be intimidated. Moreover, if we're ever discouraged in this battle, just remember, and if you haven't seen it, you can go to YouTube and find it. Remember the beauty of the look on Chris Matthews' face on MSNBC when the subject of nullification came up. I mean, it was like the return of Godzilla to this guy. Just that look of sheer terror, that maybe, just maybe, an idea that the mainstream has not approved for us, the mainstream media, the mainstream political class has not approved for us in advance, is taking root anyway. Maybe they are losing their domination over our minds. This led him to this expression of sheer terror. Yeah, it's about time. Here's the idea behind state nullification. First, as we saw in that video, which of course stole half of my remarks, thank you John Bush and Jason Rink for nothing, it comes from Thomas Jefferson, and even before that, it comes from the state ratifying convention of Richmond, Virginia in 1788. And I talk about this in the book Nullification. Now, even if you don't know what nullification is, you see a book that has the word nullification stamped over the faces of Obama, Pelosi, and Harry Reid, you say, well, whatever this thing is, I think I'm probably in favor. In 1798, Jefferson and Madison draft the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, respectively. In these resolutions, we see it spelled out what the powers of the states are in situations like this, when the state is responding to a federal law that violates the Constitution, or a federal measure that violates the Constitution. What should the states do? Well, the states should refuse to enforce this. And I give evidence that there is good constitutional grounds for believing this, and I won't go into all this tonight because I'm doing the quick version. But the bottom line of this is that Jefferson said that nullification is the rightful remedy. And James Madison said that the parties to the Constitution, he said this in his famous report of 1800, in the last resort have got to have some way to check the federal government when all three branches betray us, even the holy judicial branch, which is supposed to be infallible, and once the judges have spoken, we're all supposed to bow down and shut our mouths. Even then, says Madison, we need to be able to resist. Madison said in the Virginia resolutions of 1798 that the states were duty-bound to resist when the federal government violated the Constitution. Now, later on in his life, he said different things. And so people say, aha, well in 1830, when he was 103, he changed his mind or whatever. I addressed that on pages 288 to 290, so I'm going to leave you with that. But when we talk about this, the logic of it basically runs as follows. Just a few steps. Number one, in the American system, no government is conceived of as being sovereign. And by sovereign, I mean having ultimate decision-making power. We sometimes talk about state sovereignty, but that's just shorthand for the sovereignty of the peoples of the states. No government is sovereign. That's the old world European model that Americans fled from. It's the peoples of the states who are sovereign, and in their sovereign capacity, they apportion powers between the state governments and the federal government. And in so doing, they don't give up their sovereignty. They are merely exercising their sovereignty. They retain ultimate decision-making power. So if the agent that they themselves created, namely the federal government, should go beyond the powers granted to it by the sovereign peoples of the states, then the very logic of the system demands that the sovereign peoples of the states, by virtue of being sovereign, have to have a last resort mechanism for intervening when their own system perverts its instrument, namely the Constitution. That's the logic of it. So it doesn't matter that a bunch of, that the Supreme Court, once or twice has said, hey, you're not allowed to do this. That's totally beside the point. The point is that the logic of the system demands it. The system makes no sense otherwise. And that's what I'm elaborating on in the book and in some of my other stuff. Okay, so that's kind of I did it! Ha! I did it, 3 minutes. Okay. The federal government, said Jefferson, cannot have a monopoly on determining what its own powers are, because we all know what it's going to do. It's going to suddenly determine that it has more and more and more and more and more powers. It's going to keep on discovering these vast, untapped reservoirs of power. We all know this. I mean, this has happened. It's not like I'm talking theory up here. Just look around, look at the Constitution, then look at what we live under. This is what has happened. So it's not enough to say, well, gee, it would be nice if they would listen to the Constitution, then the government would be more limited. Yes, it would be nice. A lot of things would be nice. But power has to counteract power. You can't expect the 10th Amendment to enforce itself. The states have to assert themselves. That's the idea behind state nullification. That maybe there aren't going to be national solutions to the problems we're facing. Maybe they have to be bottom-up instead of top-down solutions. Maybe we're just feeding a monster when we keep looking for national solutions. Now, what's interesting about the thought controllers is that, many of the thought controllers are on the left. In my opinion. But what genuine progressive really thinks Joe Biden is anything other than a shill for the establishment? I mean, come on, right? A real progressive dislikes Joe Biden as much as we do. A real progressive would be opposed, as a constitutionalist is, to the Patriot Act, to the misuse of the National Guard, to the unconstitutional interference with the use of medical marijuana. And incidentally, when that case went before the Supreme Court, it was 3 of the most conservative states in the Union that stood with Angel Rach on that issue. It was Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And now, listen, I wouldn't want to be caught with a joint in Alabama. Okay. But their argument was, yeah, we don't like California's law, but that's what a federal system is, It's not some kind of nationalist nightmare where there's one policy and we're just going to shove it down your throats. No, it's live and let live. So what if Alabama is different from California? Good. Okay, good. So what if Vermont is different from Idaho? So what? That's what America is. So a progressive would support, the old-style progressive in the New Left tradition believed small is beautiful, and that meant not just business enterprise, but it meant also political units, that it's dehumanizing to have 309 million people being infallibly governed by one city. This is insane, and yet no one can even question that, because if you question that, you're an extremist, because Hillary doesn't question that, Mitt Romney doesn't question that. Don't ask this question, citizen. And there goes small is beautiful. What happened to small is beautiful? Is 309 million people small? Is that the exact right coming down from heaven scale of political order? 309 million to 1? Is that how it works? Where are they? They're nationalists. They are stuck in the nationalist mold. Every issue has one solution. And if you dissent from that, if you are a dissident, well, you know the words they'll use. Now, ever since Thomas Hobbes, in his book Leviathan, we have been taught that the way human beings have to organize themselves politically is in one irresistible power center, and there is no subsidiary body in society that has any prior liberties that cannot be abridged or canceled by that central authority. This is the starting point for political organization in the Western world, certainly since the French Revolution. And we think that's the only way to live, right? You can't have one area doing something different from another area. You can't have institutions within a larger institution that have liberties of their own. But that's exactly how European society was organized until basically the 17th or 18th centuries. There were multiple power centers, and that's what allowed society to avoid totalitarianism. If you had had a Hitler or Stalin in the 17th century, they could not have done the damage they did. As murderous as they were, they wouldn't have had the authority to do it, because they were much too hemmed in by competing power centers. When we hear all these titles that kings had centuries ago, he's the king of so-and-so, and the protector of this, and that wasn't because he was vain. That was a recognition that there were bodies under his care that preceded him, that had liberties that came before his prerogatives, and that he was bound to respect. We don't have that anymore. That's all gone. Now what we have is there's one single flat plane, there's no subsidiary body that can stand up to the center, and what have the results been? Have the results been fantastic bouts of liberty breaking out everywhere around the world? Or has it been totalitarian revolutions, total war, unpayable debts, crushing burdens, growing bureaucracies? I mean, I think the question answers itself. And yet, the misnamed progressives look at this structure and say, yep, that's the best and only way to organize society, and anyone who dissents from that must be some kind of an extremist. These are the people who had the nerve to use the expression question authority. When was the last time these people questioned anything they were fed? Anything. Come to the conclusion that the federal government has sold us a bill of goods, and they've brainwashed us into believing it. Ever since we were sitting in their crummy schools, they fed us this line that without them, we'd be totally lost, we'd be pathetic boobs, we'd all be eating poison food, we would, with all our technological advances, we wouldn't have thought of any way to come up with a non-lethal sandwich. Our kids would all be working in a mine for $1 a day, we'd all be getting our limbs blown off because our computer monitors would be exploding. Everybody would earn 3 cents an hour. There'd be no science, there'd be no art, and on and on and on, right? Everybody would be an ignoramus and this and that, right? I mean, everybody was taught this. I understand why people believe this. There's a superficial plausibility to it because you say, well, before we had a lot of government intervention, people lived in terrible conditions. Now they live in better conditions, so the one must have caused the other. That's completely illegitimate reasoning, and I think I try to demonstrate that in my newer book, Rollback. But the point is that if we were educated in, this is my new analogy, I kind of like, I'm kind of fond of, I'm very bad at analogies. I'm the anti-Peter Schiff when it comes to analogies. I'm so bad at it. He thinks of analogies in his sleep, he could be drunk, in a car accident, he's coming up with analogies. I can't think of anything. But imagine you were educated in Walmart schools run and funded by Walmart. Well, the kids, now I suppose in these schools, every day the kid goes to this classroom, and the classroom up on the wall, it's all pictures of Walmart CEOs looking down upon the kids wisely. And the kids are taught to sing songs, oh, how great the Walmart CEOs are. And, oh, God bless the Walmart CEOs, we'd all be pathetic boobs without them. So on and on and on and on, they cut out little pictures of the Walmart CEOs. And then one day a year, they get to stay home from school and meditate on the great contributions of the Walmart CEOs, whatever. Wouldn't we, in that situation, wouldn't we say, now that's a little bit creepy, come on. I mean, maybe there were a couple of good Walmart CEOs, but I refuse to believe that all good things of civilization came from these people. Like, we would say that. Yet, when it's U.S. presidents up on that wall, we accept everything they say. Oh my gosh, heaven forbid. What kind of a caveman are you? You mean you don't want the great innovations of President so-and-so? Where would we be? We'd all be dead in a ditch and have no limbs and 3 cents an hour. I mean, it's like a mental disorder. And like somehow it's been talked to. I don't know. It's an incredible racket. It is an unbelievable racket. I mean, in a way, I almost wish I was clever enough to have thought of it. That I would loot you people. I would loot and expropriate you people, and then to add insult to injury, I would train your kids to cheer what I'm doing. I mean, man, that is serious, serious sociopathic cleverness. So I don't believe it. I believe this institution has held back human progress. I believe it pits us all against each other in a civil war of everybody grabbing. And every one of us has been sucked into some kind of interest group, whether it's our occupation, or our age, or our race, or our class. Everybody wants to grab and grab and grab and grab. It's what Frederick Bastiat said. The state is the great fiction by which everyone attempts to live at the expense of everyone else. And look at where it's got. Now, incidentally, Russell Kirk is considered by some to be the founder of modern American conservatism. His classic book, The Conservative Mind, is probably in like a 9th edition by now. A very significant figure. And we look at Kirk's foreign policy, it has nothing in common with the teenage laptop bombardiers who run our foreign policy today. It has nothing to do with the neocon Bill Kristol, nothing. You look at Russell Kirk, who's a real conservative, who hasn't had his brain washed by these phonies on the radio. Kirk said that military conscription is akin to slavery. This is the most significant conservative thinker of the 20th century. In his book, 1954, called A Program for Conservatives, he laid out a foreign policy that bears zero resemblance to the interventionism that we have now. And at the end of the Persian Gulf War, he said that George H.W. Bush, now this is the most significant conservative thinker of the 20th century, he said George H.W. Bush should be strung up on the White House lawn for war crimes. Was he a pinko commie, Russell Kirk? Is that what we're reduced to? No. Now finally, therefore, my conclusion is, it is not enough to say that in Washington we've got some bumblers and boy, they're inefficient. I don't go for that. It's not that they're jokers. It's that they are raving sociopaths whom I don't want have exercising any power over me. And if we at the state level, if we in our own communities, if we can't solve our problems face to face with each other without the intervention of these people, then heaven help us. The state, but especially these modern megastates, have been a moral and material disaster. Now, are there alliances that are possible? Maybe. I mean, I did a book that I've got out there with friend Murray Palmer, and he and I disagree on almost everything, but on critical things we came together and we produced, I think, a nice little product. I don't know what types of alliances are possible. All we can do is to hold aloft the banner of justice and humanity and see who rallies to it. And no matter who joins us, fight we must. For as Ludwig von Mises said, everyone carries a part of society on his shoulders. No one is relieved of his share of responsibility by others. And no one can find a safe way out for himself if society is sweeping toward destruction. Therefore, everyone, in his own interests, must thrust himself vigorously into the intellectual battle. None can stand aside with unconcern. The interest of everyone hangs on the result. Let's all stand together. Thank you very much.